Imagine this. 300,000 years ago, the average human lived in a group smaller than a modern classroom, carrying everything they owned, sleeping under stars that offered no protection from the eyes, watching from the darkness. They had no maps, no weather forecasts, no hospitals, yet somehow, impossibly, they survived long enough for you to be here listening to this story. Here's the mind-bending part. If you could travel back to meet your ancestors from that era, you'd find their brains were virtually identical to yours. Same capacity for love, fear, creativity, and hope. But their world was trying to kill them every single day. If you're here to fall asleep, perfect, you're in the right place. Let this journey through deep time wash over you like a gentle tide. And if you're listening from somewhere across the globe, drop a comment telling me your city and what time it is there. I love reading them and imagining all the places this story travels. Now, let me take you back to a time when simply being human was an impossible task. Part 1. A planet that wanted us dead. The sun rises reluctantly over East Africa, casting long shadows across a world that looks nothing like the one you know. It's marine isotope stage 8, and Earth is locked in one of its moody, volatile phases. The climate swings like a broken pendulum between bone-dry aridity and brief, tantalizing windows of green abundance. Picture Zara, a woman whose weathered hands tell stories of survival. She's perhaps 25, ancient by the standards of her time, and she's awakening to another day where every decision could mean the difference between her family's survival and their death. Around her, 8 other members of her band stir from their huddle of shared warmth. 9 people. That's their entire universe. The Sahara stretches endlessly in what will one day be called a desert, but 300,000 years ago it pulses between wasteland and oasis following Earth's orbital dance. When the planet tilts just right, when the monsoons shift their ancient pathways, corridors of grassland and scattered lakes appear like mirages made real. Rivers flow where there will be sand. Animals migrate along routes that will vanish within a human lifetime. But this morning, Zara reads the signs of another dry spell approaching. The acacia trees are already shedding leaves, their branches reaching toward a sky that promises nothing. The seasonal waterhole that sustained them for 2 moons is now just cracked earth and the memory of moisture. In the distance, a movement catches her eye. A massive shape emerges from behind a boulder, a cave bear, easily twice the size of any bear you've ever seen, its shoulders rippling with enough muscle to shatter bones with a casual swipe. This is no cartoon character or zoo exhibit. This is 300 kilograms of evolutionary perfection designed for one purpose: staying alive by making other things dead. Fossil evidence from sites like Olduvai Gorge tells us these encounters weren't rare. Researchers have found hominin bones bearing the unmistakable puncture wounds of crocodile teeth, scratch marks from leopard claws, evidence of our ancestors being dragged into caves to feed hungry predators. Sleep was a luxury fraught with risk. Every night was a gamble against teeth and claws that hunted in darkness. Zara's band doesn't run. Running triggers the chase response, and they've learned this lesson through losses too painful to forget. Instead, they bunch together, making themselves appear larger, louder. The children instinctively move to the center. This choreography of survival has been rehearsed through countless encounters, written into their reflexes by those who didn't learn fast enough to pass on their genes. The bear studies them with intelligent eyes, calculating. It's not desperate enough yet to risk injury from these tool-carrying bipeds. Not today. It lumbers away, but the message is clear. This is not your world. You are visitors here, tolerated only as long as you remain vigilant. As the immediate danger passes, Zara's attention turns to the next crisis: food. In this world, hunger is a constant companion. There are no grocery stores, no refrigerators, no guarantee that the roots you dug yesterday will be in the same place tomorrow. Seasonal migrations of animals follow routes that can shift with climate changes, leaving human groups stranded in suddenly empty territories. The band spreads out to forage, but never beyond sight of each other. They've learned that isolation equals death. Each person becomes a mobile sensor, scanning for the flash of movement that might be prey, the subtle signs that indicate edible plants, the distant smoke trail that could mean fire, and other humans who might be competitors for the same scarce resources. Young Kessie, barely out of childhood, discovers a fallen antelope, its body still warm. But this apparent gift comes with a deadly puzzle. What killed it? Disease? Poison? A predator that might still be nearby? In a world without medical knowledge, the wrong choice doesn't just mean a stomachache, it means death for anyone who shares the meal. Climate records from deep ocean cores and ancient lake beds reveal just how brutal this period was. Temperatures could swing by 10 degrees Celsius within decades. What modern scientists call Heinrich events, massive iceberg discharges that disrupted ocean currents, created sudden, catastrophic climate shifts that could turn fertile valleys into frozen wastelands in a single generation. When the rains failed, Zara's people faced the terrible mathematics of survival. Every calorie burned in travel had to be justified by the promise of food at the destination. Every injured group member became a burden that the whole band might not be able to carry. Archaeological evidence shows that fractures and head injuries were commonplace among archaic humans, testament to lives lived on the edge of disaster. But perhaps the most insidious killer was invisible: disease. Without immunity built up over generations, without understanding of hygiene or quarantine, a simple infection could sweep through the entire group. The fact that certain immune system genes from Neanderthals later spread rapidly through human populations suggests that disease pressure was intense enough to make any genetic advantage a matter of survival. As evening approaches, Zara's band faces the daily ritual of finding shelter. Caves offer protection from predators and weather, but they're also claimed territory, potentially occupied by bears, hyenas, or other human groups with no interest in sharing. Open sleeping means exposure to night hunters and sudden weather changes. Every choice is a calculated risk. They finally settle in a rocky outcrop that offers some protection from wind and surprise attack. As darkness falls, they huddle together for warmth, taking turns maintaining watch. The night sky, unpolluted by any human light, blazes with stars that serve as both calendar and compass for people who must navigate by memory and instinct. In the darkness, something howls, not quite human, not quite animal. It might be another group of people, testing their resolve, or it might be something else entirely. Zara tightens her grip on her wooden spear, its point hardened in fires that represent one of humanity's first victories over the hostile world. This was life at 300,000 years ago, a constant negotiation with death, where survival required not just individual courage but collective wisdom, shared risk, and the kind of social bonds that could mean the difference between a group that thrived and one that simply disappeared into the fossil record without a trace. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new choices, new tests of human ingenuity and endurance. But tonight, for now, they are alive, and that is enough. Part 2. Eating raw flesh and rot. The carcass has been here for 2 days, and Django knows he's running out of time. The massive buffalo that collapsed near the watering hole represents more calories than his group has seen in a week, but it's also a death trap wrapped in the promise of survival. He crouches in the tall grass, watching hyenas tear at the animal's hindquarters with mechanical efficiency. Their bone-crushing jaws can splinter femurs like dry wood. But Django isn't watching the hyenas, he's reading the ecosystem of death that surrounds every carcass in Pleistocene Africa. A coalition of lions claimed the kill initially, their territorial roars echoing across the savannah for hours after they brought down their prey. But lions are wasteful hunters, gorging themselves before retreating to shade, leaving behind a fortune in meat and marrow that other predators know how to claim. Django's people have learned to read the hierarchy of scavenging, like a complex social map. First the lions feed, then the hyenas arrive with their crushing bite force of over 1,000 pounds per square inch. After them come the jackals, vultures, and other opportunists. Humans, with their stone tools and collective courage, can claim a position in this deadly queue, but timing is everything. Archaeological evidence from Olduvai Gorge reveals the intricate dance between human scavengers and their competitors. Cut marks on ancient bones tell precise stories, where human stone tools removed meat, where carnivore teeth gnawed marrow, where the two activities overlapped in a race against decomposition and competition. Django signals to his group with subtle hand gestures perfected through necessity. They've been watching this carcass since dawn, waiting for the perfect moment when the hyenas are satiated, but not yet ready to defend their claim with the fury of hungry competitors. The window might last only minutes. Moving as a coordinated unit, the humans approach with their stone tools ready. These aren't the refined blades of later periods, but they're sharp enough to slice, hide, and strip meat from bone. Django's flint knife, knapped with skill passed down through generations, can cut through tough sinew that would resist human teeth for hours. But this isn't like shopping at a butcher. The meat is rank, crawling with flies, its surface already showing the green tinge of bacterial activity. Modern humans would recoil from the smell, but Django's people have learned to distinguish between meat that's merely ripe and meat that's truly dangerous. Their survival depends on this knowledge. Without fire to cook their food, every meal is a gamble with pathogen exposure. Raw meat demands significantly more energy to digest and provides fewer accessible calories than cooked alternatives. The human jaw muscles of this period are massive compared to modern humans, built for the constant grinding needed to process tough, fibrous foods. As Django cuts into the carcass, he's not just gathering food, he's performing microsurgery with stone tools. Different cuts serve different purposes. Long strips of muscle for immediate consumption, chunks of fat for energy storage, hide for possible tool making, sinew for binding materials together. Nothing edible is wasted when the next meal is never guaranteed. The most precious prizes lie hidden inside the bones, marrow, the calorie, dense tissue that can mean the difference between survival and starvation. Percussion marks on archaeological bones show how early humans developed techniques for cracking open long bones to extract every possible calorie. But the humans aren't alone in understanding marrow's value. Hyenas return unexpectedly, their whooping calls cutting through the afternoon air like sirens. These aren't the cartoonish scavengers of popular imagination. They're intelligent pack hunters whose bite force can crack bones that resist human stone tools. The standoff that follows illustrates the dangerous mathematics of scavenging. Django's group has perhaps 30 seconds to grab what they can before deciding whether to fight or flee. Fighting means risking injury that could cripple them for life in a world without medical care. Fleeing means losing precious calories and possibly facing starvation. They compromise, grabbing the choicest pieces, marrow-rich bones, strips of fat, chunks of the least decomposed muscle, before retreating to a safe distance. It's not a complete victory, but in the world of 300,000 years ago, there are no complete victories, only degrees of survival. The meat they've gathered will be consumed quickly, before bacterial activity makes it truly dangerous. Without refrigeration or preservation techniques beyond simple air drying, food exists in a constant state of race against decomposition. Groups that hesitate or delay often find their hard-won calories transformed into poison. Archaeological studies reveal that early humans often consumed meat at various stages of decay, adapting their digestive systems to handle bacterial loads that would hospitalize modern people. Their gut microbiomes, shaped by necessity, included strains capable of processing semi-putrid protein without fatal consequences. Yet scavenging was never just about desperation. Recent research shows that successful scavenging required sophisticated knowledge, understanding animal behavior patterns, reading environmental cues, predicting where and when carcasses would become available. The most successful groups developed mental maps of territory that included not just water sources and plant foods, but the seasonal patterns of predator activity. Django's grandfather had taught him to read the sky for vultures, whose circling patterns could indicate fresh kills from miles away. He learned to identify the specific calls of different carnivores, understanding that leopards and lions leave different amounts of meat behind, creating different opportunities for human scavenging. Some of the most dangerous moments came not from the carcasses themselves, but from the predators attracted to scavenging humans. Crocodile-damaged hominin fossils found at various African sites tell grim stories of scavenging expeditions that ended in tragedy when the scavengers became prey. As Django's group processes their hard-won meat, they're also participating in a learning process that will eventually transform human capabilities. The tools they use to butcher carrion are the same tools they'll eventually turn to active hunting. The social coordination required for safe scavenging develops the same skills they'll later use for complex group hunts. The raw meat they consume, with all its risks and challenges, is building the energy budget that will eventually support larger brains, more complex tool-making, and the social innovations that separate humans from their competitors. Every dangerous meal is an investment in cognitive development that won't pay off for thousands of generations. But that evening, as Django's group settles into their temporary shelter with bellies fuller than they've been in days, none of that evolutionary future matters. What matters is that they've survived another day, in a world where survival isn't guaranteed, where every meal comes with risk, and where the line between predator and prey shifts constantly depending on circumstance, timing, and courage. The meat will sustain them through several days of travel to new territory, new opportunities, new dangers. Tomorrow they'll face the same eternal questions. Where is the next meal coming from? And what are they willing to risk to claim it? Part 3. Fire. The first superpower, taming the night. Asha strikes flint against pyrite for the 47th time, her hands steady despite the approaching darkness. Around her, the rest of her band watches with the focused intensity of people whose lives depend on this moment. It's been 3 days since their last fire died in an unexpected downpour, and 3 days without fire in the world of 300,000 years ago feels like a lifetime borrowed against death. The spark catches. A tiny orange glow, no bigger than a pinprick, suddenly represents the difference between civilization and chaos, between safety and terror, between the human world and everything else that owns the night. Asha breathes gently onto the tinder, dried grass, fungus, and shredded bark collected over days of careful preparation. The spark grows, hesitates, then suddenly blooms into flame. The transformation is so sudden, so magical, that even though she's done this hundreds of times, she still feels the primal surge of triumph that her ancestors have experienced for nearly 1,000,000 years. Archaeological evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa pushes controlled fire use back at least 1,000,000 years. Microscopic analysis of sediment layers reveals burned bone and ash deposits that could only have resulted from intentional firemaking within the cave. These weren't accidental fires or natural blazes that humans simply maintained. They were deliberately created and controlled flames that mark one of humanity's first true technological revolutions. But having fire and mastering fire are different achievements separated by hundreds of thousands of years of trial and error. The flames dancing in front of Asha represent not just combustion, but the culmination of countless generations learning to read wood, to understand airflow, to predict how different materials burn, and most importantly, to plan for fire's needs in advance. As darkness settles over their camp, the fire transforms everything. The circle of light it creates becomes the boundary of human space in a world that belongs to other predators after sunset. Beyond the flickering illumination, eyes reflect the firelight. Some curious, some hungry, all maintaining a respectful distance from this strange human magic that turns night into day. The psychological impact of fire extends far beyond simple illumination. Modern sleep studies of populations living without artificial light show that natural human sleep patterns involve 2 distinct periods separated by a wake phase during the night. For Asha's people, this midnight wakefulness around maintained fires becomes time for stories, tool-making, and social bonding that knits the group together in ways impossible during the scattered activities of daylight. Children learn by firelight, not through formal instruction, but through the immersive storytelling that passes down essential survival knowledge: which plants are poisonous, where the seasonal water sources can be found, how to read animal tracks, how to predict weather changes. All of this information, crucial for survival, gets woven into narratives that make knowledge memorable and transferable. But Usha's fire serves purposes beyond light and social cohesion. As she feeds carefully selected wood into the flames, she's also operating a primitive chemical laboratory. The heat and smoke from her fire are processing hides, driving out parasites and bacteria that would otherwise make animal skins unusable for clothing or shelter. The real revolution, though, lies in what fire does to food. When Usha places chunks of meat near the coals, she's not just improving taste, she's dramatically increasing the number of calories her people can extract from their hard-won meals. Cooking breaks down cellular structures in meat and plant matter, making nutrients more accessible to human digestion and reducing the energy cost of processing food. This cooking advantage compounds over time in ways that reshape human biology itself. Groups with reliable fire can extract more energy from the same amount of food, supporting larger brains and more complex social structures. The energy saved from reduced chewing time, cooked food requires far less mechanical processing than raw alternatives, frees up time for tool-making, planning, and other cognitively demanding activities. Usha's mastery of fire also extends to tool-making in ways that won't become fully apparent for tens of thousands of years. She knows how to heat-treat stone to improve its knapping properties, how to harden wooden spear points in coals, and how to create the adhesives that will eventually revolutionize composite tool technology. The birch tar that she can produce by carefully controlling combustion temperatures will one day allow her descendants to bind stone points to wooden shafts, creating weapons far more lethal and reliable than anything available to groups without sophisticated fire technology. These composite tools represent cognitive leaps that require planning across multiple timescales and understanding of complex cause and effect relationships. Yet fire also brings new vulnerabilities. Maintaining flame requires constant attention and fuel collection. The smoke that helps preserve food and process materials also signals human presence to competitors across vast distances. Fires can spread out of control, destroying resources and attracting unwanted attention. Most challenging of all, fire creates dependency. Once a group adapts to the advantages of cooking, they become less capable of surviving without it. Raw food diets that sustained their ancestors become insufficient to support their energy needs. They've gained a superpower, but one that demands constant vigilance to maintain. As Usha banks the coals for the night, covering them with ash and sand to preserve embers until morning, she's participating in a ritual that connects her to every human group that will follow. The knowledge of fire maintenance, passed down through practical demonstration rather than formal instruction, represents one of humanity's first truly universal technologies. The flames that die down to glowing coals don't just warm her group through the cold night, they're incubating the future. Fire-enabled food processing supports the brain development that will eventually produce art, music, complex language, and all the innovations that separate humans from their closest relatives. But in this moment, 300,000 years ago, none of that evolutionary destiny matters to Usha. What matters is that her people will sleep warm tonight, that predators will think twice before approaching their camp, and that tomorrow they'll wake with the energy needed to continue their endless journey across a landscape that challenges them at every step. The mastery of fire represents humanity's first victory over the limitations of biology. No other species has ever learned to carry the sun with them, to extend day into night, to transform raw materials through controlled combustion. It's a power so fundamental that it still defines human civilization today, even though the flames now come from gas burners and electrical heating elements rather than carefully maintained wood fires. As Usha falls asleep to the gentle crackling of settling coals, She carries in her mind the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who learned to read fire, to feed it, to predict its behavior, and to harness its transformative power. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight her people rest secure in their circle of light, masters of the first technology that truly belongs to humanity alone. Part 4. Weapons that drew blood. Tao hefts the spear in his calloused hands, feeling its perfect balance like a musician testing a finely tuned instrument. The weapon represents months of planning, weeks of careful craftsmanship, and knowledge passed down through generations of hunters who understood that in a world of massive predators and dangerous prey, the difference between a good weapon and a great one measured the distance between life and death. The spear shaft, carved from dense hardwood and seasoned over an entire dry season, bears the subtle modifications that separate expert toolmaking from desperate improvisation. Tao's grandfather taught him to read wood grain like a map, understanding how cellular structure determines strength and flexibility. The shaft tapers precisely, thick enough at the grip to absorb impact shock, narrow enough at the point to penetrate hide and muscle. But it's the spear's tip that represents the cutting edge of 300,000-year-old technology. Hafted to the wooden shaft with carefully prepared adhesive, the stone point transforms a simple stick into a composite weapon system whose lethality exceeds anything that individual materials could achieve alone. Archaeological evidence from sites like Kathu Pan in South Africa reveals that stone-tipped spears existed by at least 500,000 years ago, marking a cognitive revolution in human technology. These weren't crude weapons cobbled together from available materials, they were precision instruments that required understanding of physics, materials, science, and engineering principles that modern people take for granted. The stone point itself tells a story of sophisticated knowledge. Tao selected the raw material not from whatever rocks happened to be nearby, but from specific stone sources known for their mechanical properties. The flint he used fractures predictably, creating edges sharper than surgical steel. The knapping techniques he employed to shape it required understanding angles, force vectors, and material stress that goes far beyond simple trial and error. Creating the adhesive that binds point to shaft demanded even more complex knowledge. Tao collected birch bark during specific seasons when resin content peaks, then processed it through carefully controlled heating that transforms raw plant material into a strong, waterproof cement. The process requires precise temperature control, too little heat, and the resin won't flow properly. Too much, and it burns into uselessness. The knowledge required to produce effective birch tar predates other evidence of advanced pyrotechnology by hundreds of thousands of years. Recent experiments show that creating usable adhesive requires understanding of complex thermal processes, suggesting that early humans possessed sophisticated cognitive abilities long before other evidence of symbolic behavior appears in the archaeological record. But Tao's spear represents more than just technical innovation. It embodies a revolution in human hunting strategy. Armed with thrown weapons, humans could kill large animals while remaining outside the range of horns, claws, and crushing hooves. This standoff capability transformed small, relatively weak primates into apex predators, capable of bringing down prey many times their size. Use-wear analysis of archaeological spear points reveals patterns consistent with both thrusting and throwing use, suggesting that different weapons serve different tactical roles. Close-quarters combat demanded robust points that could penetrate thick hide and remain embedded during violent struggle. Throwing spears required lighter, more aerodynamic points that could maintain accuracy across hunting distances. The hunting party that Tao leads carries an arsenal of specialized tools, each optimized for different aspects of the complex process of converting living animals into survival resources. Cutting tools for butchering, scrapers for hide processing, awls for working leather, hammerstones for accessing marrow. Every implement represents accumulated knowledge about materials, techniques, and applications refined through countless generations of use. As they track a group of antelope across the savanna, Tao's group employs hunting strategies that require the same kind of coordination and planning that modern military units use for complex operations. They've studied their prey's behavior patterns, identified likely routes and destinations, and positioned themselves to take advantage of terrain features that will channel animals toward optimal ambush locations. The psychological dimension of hunting with advanced weapons extends beyond simple killing efficiency. Successful hunters gain prestige within their groups, but they also assume responsibilities for sharing meat and teaching skills to younger generations. The spear becomes a symbol of competence and social standing, but also of obligation to the community that invested in the hunter's training. Archaeological evidence suggests that weapon technology created new forms of inequality within human groups. Skilled toolmakers could produce implements that dramatically improved hunting success, but the knowledge required was specialized and difficult to acquire. This technical expertise became a form of social capital that could be traded, inherited, and leveraged for status within the group. Yet weapons also created new vulnerabilities. Broken points during crucial hunts could mean starvation for entire groups. Lost or damaged weapons might be irreplaceable if the raw materials or expertise needed for repair weren't available. The more sophisticated human technology became, the more dependent groups became on maintaining complex knowledge systems and social networks. The most dangerous aspect of advanced weapon technology wasn't related to hunting at all, but to the potential for human conflict. The same spears that could bring down aurochs and cave bears could also kill other humans. Archaeological evidence from this period shows trauma patterns consistent with interpersonal violence, suggesting that competition over resources sometimes escalated to deadly conflict. Tao understands that his spear, for all its technical sophistication, is ultimately a tool for managing risk in an uncertain world. Every hunt is a gamble that weighs the energy invested in tracking and stalking against the potential caloric reward of success. Every weapon represents insurance against starvation, protection against predators, and leverage in negotiations with other groups who might compete for the same resources. As his hunting party approaches their quarry, Tao makes final adjustments to his grip, reading wind direction and estimating range with skills honed through years of practice. The antelope haven't detected human presence yet, but they're alert, constantly scanning for threats in a landscape where predators hunt from every ecological niche. The throw, when it comes, represents the culmination of hundreds of thousands of years of technological innovation compressed into a single moment of ballistic physics. The spear leaves Tao's hand with velocity that transforms stored human energy into kinetic projectile force, carrying with it all the accumulated knowledge of materials, science, engineering, and hunting strategy that separates modern humans from every other species on Earth. Whether the hunt succeeds or fails, Tao's weapon has already served its most important function. It has extended human capability beyond biological limitations, transforming vulnerable primates into competitors capable of thriving in any environment Earth can create. The spear in his hands is more than a hunting tool. It's humanity's declaration of technological independence from the constraints of evolution. Part 5. Walking into the Unknown. Why and how people left Africa. Naledi stands at the edge of everything she has ever known, staring across a landscape that stretches toward horizons that promise either salvation or death. Behind her, the familiar territories of her ancestors are slowly dying under the relentless pressure of drought that has persisted for longer than anyone in her band can remember. Ahead lies the unknown, valleys that might hold water, grasslands that might support game, or empty wasteland that could claim every life in her group. The decision to leave isn't really a choice, it's survival mathematics, calculated in dwindling resources and increasing desperation. The seasonal waterholes that sustained her people for generations have become cracked earth. The animal migration routes that provided predictable hunting opportunities have shifted or disappeared entirely. Stay and face certain death. Leave and face probable death. The mathematics of desperation make the choice inevitable. Archaeological evidence places anatomically modern humans in Africa by at least 230,000 years ago, with sites like Omo Kibish in Ethiopia pushing back our species' origins even further. These early populations weren't static inhabitants of a stable environment. They were dynamic, adaptable groups, constantly responding to climate pressures that made survival a continuous process of adaptation and movement. Naledi's band represents one wave in a process that will continue for hundreds of thousands of years, humans testing the boundaries of the possible, pushing into marginal territories when familiar lands become uninhabitable, retreating when new environments prove too challenging, always probing for the edges of the survivable world. The route she contemplates isn't a road or even a trail in any modern sense. It's a corridor of possibility opened by climate cycles that operate on timescales far beyond human planning horizons. Orbital variations in Earth's distance from the Sun create periodic humid phases across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, transforming desert barriers into temporary bridges of grassland and scattered water sources. These Green Sahara episodes occur roughly every 20,000 years, driven by precession cycles that shift monsoon patterns across continental Africa. When the alignment is correct, rainfall increases dramatically across what are normally arid regions, creating lakes, rivers, and vegetation that can support large mammals and the humans who hunt them. But Naledi doesn't understand orbital mechanics or precession cycles. What she knows is that her grandmother's stories speak of times when green corridors extended north toward lands beyond the Great Desert, and that scouts returning from long journeys sometimes bring tales of distant waters and unfamiliar game animals. The band that prepares to follow her represents careful selection rather than random migration. Too many people, and they'll exhaust local resources before finding new ones. Too few, and they won't have enough cooperation capacity to handle the challenges they'll face. Every member must contribute specialized knowledge, tracking, tool-making, plant identification, weather prediction, social negotiation with other groups they might encounter. As they begin their journey, Naledi carries mental maps inherited from generations of explorers who tested these routes before. Knowledge of seasonal water sources, understanding of which plants indicate permanent springs, recognition of geological formations that suggest favorable hunting grounds. This information isn't written down, it exists only in human memory, transmitted through stories and practical demonstration. Archaeological sites along ancient migration routes tell stories of repeated human presence separated by thousands of years. Jebel Faya, in the United Arab Emirates, shows occupation around 125,000 years ago, during a humid period that made the Arabian Peninsula habitable. Similar sites across the Levant document multiple waves of modern human expansion from Africa, followed by apparent retreats when climate conditions shifted. These weren't one-way trips or mass migrations in the modern sense. They were exploratory probes, extended scouting expeditions that sometimes established permanent populations and sometimes ended in local extinction when environmental conditions changed faster than human adaptation could compensate. Naledi's group follows ancient animal paths that wind between mountain ranges and along seasonal river valleys. These routes weren't created for humans, but for the large mammals that migrate across continental distances, following rainfall patterns and seasonal vegetation growth. Humans learned to read these highways of survival, understanding that where elephants and antelope could thrive, human groups might also find the resources needed for survival. Water drives every decision about route and timing. Desert crossing requires knowledge of hidden springs, seasonal rainwater collection sites, and plant sources that store moisture in roots or leaves. Miscalculation means death within days. Success requires information gathered over multiple generations of scouts who paid with their lives to map the possibilities. The psychological challenges of migration extend beyond simple physical survival. Leaving familiar territory means abandoning the graves of ancestors, the spiritual significance of known landmarks, the social networks that provide identity and support. For people whose worldview is intimately connected to specific places, migration represents a form of social and spiritual death that must be weighed against the alternative of literal death from resource depletion. Yet migration also offers opportunities unavailable to sedentary populations. New territories might provide access to better stone for toolmaking, different plant resources with nutritional advantages, or game animals that haven't learned to fear human hunters. Genetic diversity improves when isolated populations encounter and interbreed with groups from different regions. As Naledi's band penetrates deeper into unknown territory, they're participating in the process that will eventually spread modern humans across every habitable continent on Earth. But they're also engaging in the kind of risk assessment and collective decision-making that defines human social evolution. Each water source they discover must be evaluated for reliability, defensibility, and proximity to other resources. Each new group they encounter represents potential allies, trading partners, competitors, or enemies. The decisions they make about cooperation versus conflict will influence the genetic and cultural legacy they pass to future generations. The tools they carry represent technological adaptations to mobility, lightweight, versatile implements that can serve multiple functions and be easily repaired from materials available in diverse environments. Their knowledge systems emphasize portability and adaptability rather than specialization to specific ecological niches. Months into their journey, Naledi's group has learned to read new landscapes, to identify unfamiliar plants, to track species they've never hunted before. They've negotiated with stranger groups whose languages and customs differ from their own. They've adapted their tool-making techniques to local stone sources and modified their hunting strategies to match new prey behaviors. Some members of the original band didn't survive the transition. Others chose to join different groups encountered along the route. New members were recruited from populations they met during their travels. By the time they establish a new territorial base, Naledi's band has become something different from what it was when the journey began, not just geographically relocated, but culturally and genetically transformed by the migration experience. The success of their journey won't be measured in a single generation, but in their descendants' ability to thrive in environments that their African ancestors never experienced. They've carried with them not just their genes and immediate survival knowledge, but the cultural capacity for adaptation that will allow humans to colonize Arctic tundra, tropical islands, high-altitude plateaus, and every other environmental challenge Earth can present. Standing in their new territory as the sun sets over unfamiliar horizons, Naledi doesn't know that her journey represents one strand in a process that will eventually populate every continent. What she knows is that her people are still alive, still capable of finding water and food and shelter, still able to maintain the social bonds that make survival possible in a dangerous world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight they rest in a place that their courage and knowledge have claimed from the unknown, adding another chapter to the human story of expansion, adaptation, and survival against impossible odds. Part 6. Brutal bonds of survival, sharing, or starving. Kobe returns to camp empty-handed for the third consecutive day, his shoulders sagging with the weight of failure that threatens not just his own survival, but the lives of everyone who depends on him. In the harsh mathematics of life at 300,000 years ago, unsuccessful hunters don't just go hungry, they become burdens that small groups can't afford to carry indefinitely. But as he approaches the evening fire, something remarkable happens. Instead of rejection or recrimination, he's greeted with a portion of plant foods gathered by others in his band, meat from a successful hunt by his cousin 2 days earlier, even water carried from a distant source by group members who could have conserved their energy by staying closer to camp. This moment illustrates one of humanity's most crucial adaptations, the development of reciprocal sharing systems that buffer individual failure against group survival. Without refrigeration, food preservation, or any safety net beyond human cooperation, early human groups developed social technologies that were every bit as important as stone tools or controlled fire. Among modern forager populations like the Hadza of Tanzania, anthropologists have documented sharing systems so extensive that successful hunters typically retain less than half the meat from their own kills. The rest gets distributed according to complex social algorithms that account for kinship relationships, reciprocal obligations, need levels, and social status within the group. These aren't acts of charity. They're insurance policies against the inevitable days when even skilled hunters come home empty-handed. The Ach people of Paraguay demonstrate how sophisticated these sharing networks can become. When hunters return with large game, the meat distribution follows protocols so intricate they resemble computer algorithms: primary shares to immediate family, secondary shares to reciprocal partners, tertiary shares based on current need and past contributions. Every transaction creates social debts and credits that bind the group together through webs of mutual obligation. Kobe's band operates under similar principles, though their system has evolved over thousands of years of trial and error in environments where mistakes mean death. Children learn the sharing rules not through formal instruction but by watching every meal distribution, absorbing the complex social mathematics that determine who gets what under different circumstances. The psychological mechanisms underlying human sharing behavior run deeper than conscious calculation. Neurological studies of modern populations show that giving activates reward pathways in the brain similar to those triggered by eating, sex, or other survival-critical activities. Evolution has literally wired humans to experience sharing as pleasurable, creating biological incentives for behaviors that improve group survival, even when they reduce individual resources. But sharing in Kobe's world isn't just about food. It extends to every resource that can mean the difference between survival and death. Tools get shared when individual hunting expeditions require specialized equipment. Knowledge gets shared when someone discovers new water sources, identifies edible plants, or develops improved techniques for any survival-critical activity. Even sleeping spaces and fire-tending duties are distributed according to principles that prioritize group welfare over individual comfort. The enforcement mechanisms for these sharing systems operate through reputation and social pressure rather than formal punishment. Individuals who consistently take without contributing find themselves gradually excluded from reciprocal networks. In small groups where everyone knows everyone else's contribution history, selfish behavior becomes a form of slow-motion suicide. Anthropological studies reveal how these systems handle free riders and cheaters. Among the Jew, Hoanzi of the Kalahari, individuals who consistently undercontribute to group welfare face escalating social sanctions, ridicule, exclusion from decision-making, reduction in sharing benefits, and ultimately expulsion from the group, a death sentence in environments where survival requires collective action. Yet the sharing systems that keep Kobe's group alive also create new forms of vulnerability. Successful individuals must constantly balance personal accumulation against social obligation. Too much hoarding triggers group resentment and potential exclusion. Too much giving depletes personal resources below survival thresholds. The optimal strategy requires constant social calibration and reputation management. Children in these systems face unique challenges and opportunities. On one hand, they receive resources and protection from multiple group members, not just their biological parents. This alloparenting system provides buffering against parental death or incapacity that was crucial in high mortality environments. On the other hand, children must learn complex social rules about reciprocity, obligation, and resource distribution that determine their future integration into adult sharing networks. The foods that get shared reveal sophisticated understanding of nutritional complementarity. Plant foods collected by women provide carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals that balance the proteins and fats obtained through hunting. Seasonal timing ensures that different food sources become available in sequences that maintain nutritional balance throughout annual cycles. Modern nutritional analysis of traditional forager diets shows remarkable sophistication in food combinations that maximize bioavailability of essential nutrients. The sharing systems that distribute these foods operate as primitive but effective public health systems, ensuring that nutritional deficiencies in some group members get compensated by surpluses in others. As Kobe settles into his shared meal, he participates in social transactions that extend far beyond simple calorie transfer. Every bite he takes creates obligation to reciprocate when his hunting fortune improves. Every gesture of gratitude reinforces social bonds that make his group more cohesive and effective. Every contribution he'll make tomorrow to plant gathering, tool maintenance, or childcare will be remembered and factored into future resource distributions. The sharing networks that sustain small human groups also serve as information distribution systems. Hunters share knowledge about animal movements, weather patterns, and territorial boundaries of neighboring groups. Gatherers share information about seasonal plant availability, water source reliability, and potential dangers encountered during foraging expeditions. This information sharing creates collective intelligence that exceeds what any individual could accumulate through direct experience. Group memory extends back through generations of accumulated knowledge, creating survival advantages that compound over time. Mistakes that killed individuals in the past become lessons that protect future generations, but only if the social systems exist to transmit and preserve that knowledge. The evening conversations around Kobe's fire represent one of humanity's earliest technologies for collective problem-solving. Complex challenges that would overwhelm individual decision-making capacity get distributed across multiple minds, processed through different perspectives, and synthesized into group strategies that draw on everyone's experience and expertise. Yet, these sharing systems also create constraints on individual freedom and autonomy that modern people might find suffocating. Every resource decision becomes a social negotiation. Every personal choice gets evaluated for its impact on group welfare. Privacy becomes a luxury that small groups struggling for survival can't afford. The social pressure to share extends beyond material resources to emotional labor and psychological support. Group members are expected to contribute to morale, resolve conflicts, maintain social harmony, and provide emotional stability during crises. The burden of collective responsibility means that personal problems quickly become group problems. As the fire dies down and Kobe's group prepares for sleep, they arrange themselves in patterns that reflect and reinforce the social bonds created through sharing. Sleeping proximity indicates trust levels, reciprocal obligations, and social status within the group hierarchy. Even unconscious vulnerability gets distributed according to the same principles that govern resource allocation during waking hours. The sharing systems that allowed Kobe's people to survive represent humanity's first social safety nets, primitive but effective insurance policies against the individual failures that could spell death in an unforgiving world. These mechanisms for collective risk management would eventually evolve into the complex economic and political systems that define modern human societies. But 300,000 years ago, as Kobe falls asleep surrounded by people who shared their resources with him despite his hunting failures, the future evolution of human social systems matters less than the immediate reality. He's alive, fed, and protected by social bonds that transform individual weakness into collective strength. Tomorrow he'll hunt again, and whether he succeeds or fails, the sharing networks that sustained him today will continue to operate, buffering individual fortune against group survival, ensuring that temporary setbacks don't become permanent catastrophes, and maintaining the social cohesion that makes human cooperation possible in a world designed to kill anyone who faces its challenges alone. Part 7. First Signs of the Mind. Amara kneels beside the still form of her grandfather, her weathered hands trembling as she arranges the red ochre around his body, in patterns that feel both ancient and urgently necessary. This moment, perhaps 100,000 years ago, in what will someday be called Khafre Cave, represents something unprecedented in the 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. Creatures who have developed the cognitive capacity to contemplate their own mortality and respond with ritual. The red pigment she scatters isn't randomly chosen. Ochre requires deliberate collection from specific geological formations, processing through grinding and mixing techniques that transform raw mineral into usable paint and transport across considerable distances to locations where it will be needed. The effort invested in obtaining and preparing this material suggests that its use carries significance beyond simple decoration. Around her grandfather's neck, Amara places a carefully crafted necklace of perforated shells, each bead representing hours of patient work with stone tools to create uniform holes without breaking the fragile material. These shells originated from distant coastlines, carried through trade networks or long-distance travel that connected inland populations with marine resources hundreds of kilometers away. The burial she's creating won't preserve perfectly. The archaeological record will eventually yield tantalizing fragments that future scientists will debate and interpret. But in this moment, Amara is participating in humanity's first experiments with symbolic behavior, the cognitive revolution that separates modern humans from every other species that has ever existed. The ochre itself tells a complex story of human technological and cognitive development. Creating usable pigment requires understanding of mineral properties, knowledge of processing techniques, and planning capabilities that extend across multiple timescales. The fact that ochre appears in archaeological contexts associated with early modern humans suggests that symbolic thinking and technological sophistication developed in parallel. Recent discoveries at Blombos Cave in South Africa reveal even more sophisticated uses of ochre, dating back 100,000 years. Engraved pieces show geometric patterns that required planning, execution, and possibly symbolic meaning. The complexity of these engravings suggests that the cognitive capabilities underlying symbolic behavior were fully developed among early modern human populations. But Amara's burial ritual represents more than just individual creativity. It reflects group consensus about appropriate treatment of the dead that indicates shared symbolic systems and collective meaning-making. The effort her band invests in this ceremony comes at the cost of time and energy that could be spent on immediate survival needs, suggesting that symbolic behavior has become important enough to justify resource allocation. The shells she uses for decoration carry their own technological and social implications. Creating uniform perforations in marine shell requires specialized tools, precise motor control, and understanding of material properties that prevent breakage during the boring process. The resulting beads indicate not just individual skill, but standardized techniques that could be taught and transmitted across generations. The trade networks that brought these shells to inland sites represent complex social relationships extending across vast geographical distances. Coastal populations had to collect appropriate shells, recognize their value for inland trading partners, and maintain communication and trust relationships that enabled long-distance exchange of materials that have no immediate survival value. Archaeological evidence from this period shows that personal ornaments weren't randomly distributed among early human populations. Certain individuals received more elaborate grave goods, suggesting that social differentiation and status systems had already developed among groups that might have numbered fewer than 50 people. These early experiments with inequality would eventually evolve into the complex social hierarchies that define modern human societies. Yet the symbolic behaviors that Amara demonstrates also carry profound psychological and social functions that extend beyond simple status display. Ritual treatment of the dead helps groups process grief and loss in ways that maintain social cohesion during emotionally destabilizing events. The ceremonies that surround death create meaning from mortality, transforming individual tragedy into collective affirmation of group identity and continuity. The geometric patterns found on ochre pieces and early art objects suggest that humans had developed not just the motor skills required for precise mark making, but the cognitive frameworks for creating and recognizing abstract patterns. This capacity for abstraction underlies all subsequent human achievements in mathematics, language, music, and visual arts. Modern cognitive science reveals that symbolic thinking requires neural capabilities that distinguish human brains from those of our closest relatives. The ability to let one thing represent another thing, to understand that marks on stone can carry meaning beyond their physical properties, represents a fundamental shift in information processing that enabled all subsequent cultural evolution. As Amara completes her grandfather's burial, she's also participating in humanity's first experiments with what anthropologists call costly signaling, behaviors that demonstrate group membership, individual commitment, and social status through resource investment that serves no immediate practical purpose. The time and materials devoted to burial rituals signal the group's capacity for surplus resource allocation and collective action. The pigments and ornaments placed with the dead also represent early human experiments with permanence and memory. Unlike the ephemeral marks that earlier humans might have made in sand or on perishable materials, ochre paintings and durable shell beads create lasting records that can survive for thousands of years. These materials serve as external memory storage that extends human information retention beyond individual lifespans. But perhaps most significantly, Amara's burial ritual represents evidence for early human concepts of personhood and individual identity that persist beyond biological death. The care taken in arranging the body and associated materials suggests belief systems that attribute continuing significance to deceased individuals, indicating cognitive frameworks sophisticated enough to contemplate abstract concepts like souls, afterlife, or spiritual continuation. Recent discoveries have pushed evidence for symbolic behavior even earlier in human evolution, though these findings remain controversial. Claims that Homo naledi, a small-brained early human species, created deliberate burials and rock engravings around 250,000 years ago have generated intense scientific debate about the cognitive requirements for symbolic behavior. The controversy surrounding Homo naledi highlights how difficult it is to identify the earliest examples of symbolic thinking in the archaeological record. Determining whether marks on stone represent intentional symbol-making or accidental damage requires careful analysis of context, pattern recognition, and elimination of alternative explanations. The standards of evidence for such claims remain necessarily high. As evening falls over Kufza Cave, Amara's completed burial represents a watershed moment in human cognitive evolution. The red ochre that surrounds her grandfather's body, the carefully crafted shell ornaments that will accompany him into the earth, and the ritual behaviors that structured the entire ceremony all point toward mental capabilities that make modern human culture possible. The symbolic thinking that Amara demonstrates won't remain confined to burial contexts. The same cognitive mechanisms that enable ritual treatment of the dead will eventually produce cave paintings, musical instruments, complex language systems, and all the cultural innovations that separate humans from other species. But the roots of these achievements lie in moments like this one, when early humans first began to create meaning beyond immediate survival needs. Tomorrow, Amara's group will resume the endless tasks of finding food, water, and shelter in a dangerous world. But tonight, they have invested precious time and resources in activities that serve no practical purpose except to affirm their humanity, to create meaning from mortality, and to establish the symbolic foundations that will support every subsequent achievement in human cultural evolution. The ochre that stains Amara's hands as she completes the ceremony will fade within days, but the cognitive revolution it represents will echo across hundreds of thousands of years of human development, eventually producing art, religion, science, and every other uniquely human attempt to find meaning in existence. Part 8. Rivals in the Shadows. Jorik crouches motionless in the underbrush, his breath forming small clouds in the cold European air as he watches the strange hunters across the valley. Their bodies are built differently from his own people, shorter, more robust, with faces that project forward in ways that seem almost animalistic, yet they move with obvious intelligence, coordinating their hunt with hand signals and tactical awareness that mirror his own group's strategies. These are Neanderthals, though Jorik has no name for them beyond the others. For tens of thousands of years, modern humans and Neanderthals have shared the landscapes of Europe and Western Asia, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating, sometimes interbreeding in encounters that have left genetic traces still visible in human DNA today. The Neanderthal hunting party, Jorik observes, represents a lineage that has survived in Ice Age Europe for over 200,000 years, adapting to glacial cycles and environmental challenges that would test any human population. Their bodies show evolutionary modifications for cold climate survival, compact builds that conserve heat, large nasal cavities that warm incoming air, and muscle mass that generates the calories needed to maintain body temperature in subarctic conditions. But it's their tools that capture Jorik's attention and concern. The Neanderthals carry spears tipped with stone points that rival anything his own people can produce, hafted with adhesives that demonstrate sophisticated pyrotechnology and material science. Their hunting strategies show evidence of long-term planning, coordinated group action, and detailed knowledge of animal behavior that comes only through generations of accumulated experience. Recent archaeological discoveries have revolutionized understanding of Neanderthal capabilities, revealing evidence for symbolic behavior, artistic expression, and cultural sophistication that challenges earlier assumptions about cognitive differences between human species. Neanderthal sites show evidence of pigment use, personal ornaments, and possibly even cave art that predates the earliest modern human artistic achievements in Europe. Yet genetic analysis reveals a complex story of interaction between modern humans and Neanderthals that goes far beyond simple competition or replacement. DNA extracted from ancient bones shows that interbreeding occurred multiple times across different geographical regions and time periods, creating hybrid populations whose descendants carried advantageous genes from both lineages. Most people of non-African ancestry today carry between 1 and 3% Neanderthal DNA, a genetic legacy that influences everything from immune system function to skin color to metabolic efficiency. Some of these inherited variants provided advantages that helped modern humans adapt to environments outside Africa, essentially allowing our ancestors to borrow evolutionary solutions developed by populations that had been adapting to Eurasian conditions for hundreds of thousands of years. As Jorik continues his surveillance, he doesn't realize he's observing a population that has already contributed to his own genetic makeup. His great-grandmother bore children fathered by a Neanderthal hunter during a period of resource sharing between the groups. Those hybrid offspring thrived, carrying genetic variants that improved cold tolerance and disease resistance, advantages that helped their descendants survive in challenging northern climates. The story becomes even more complex when considering Denisovans, a mysterious human population known primarily through DNA analysis of fragmentary remains from caves in Siberia and Tibet. Denisovan genetic material appears in modern populations across Asia and Oceania, sometimes comprising up to 5% of individual genomes, indicating extensive interbreeding between modern humans and this enigmatic group. One of the most remarkable discoveries in recent human evolutionary studies came from a single bone fragment found in Denisova Cave, the remains of a first-generation hybrid individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. This finding, nicknamed Deni, provides direct evidence that different human species not only coexisted but regularly interbred with each other. The genetic contributions from these ancient encounters weren't random. Natural selection favored certain inherited variants while eliminating others, suggesting that some archaic genes provided genuine survival advantages. High-altitude populations in Tibet carry Denisovan variants of the ipasone gene that improve oxygen utilization in low-oxygen environments, essentially providing genetic technology for mountain living that modern humans couldn't have evolved independently in the time available. Immune system genes show some of the strongest evidence for adaptive introgression from archaic human populations. Variants of toll-like receptor genes and other pathogen resistance mechanisms that originated in Neanderthals and Denisovans became widespread in modern human populations, suggesting that borrowed immunity provided crucial protection against diseases encountered as humans expanded into new environments. But the relationship between different human species wasn't always peaceful or cooperative. Archaeological evidence shows signs of violence and competition for resources, particularly during periods of climate stress when territorial ranges compressed and hunting grounds became scarce. Some Neanderthal sites show evidence of cannibalism and trauma that might indicate warfare between groups competing for survival. The extinction of Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago remains one of the great mysteries in human evolution. Climate change, disease, competition with modern humans, and simple demographic bad luck have all been proposed as contributing factors. The reality probably involved complex interactions between all these variables, creating a perfect storm of challenges that ultimately proved insurmountable. As Jorik watches the Neanderthal hunting party disappear into the forest, he's witnessing one of the last chapters in a story that has been unfolding for hundreds of thousands of years. Within a few thousand more years, Neanderthals will vanish from the archaeological record, leaving behind only the genetic traces that still influence human biology today. The Denisovan story remains even more mysterious, with most evidence coming from DNA analysis rather than fossil remains. Recent discoveries of Denisovan-like genetic material in populations across Asia suggest that this group had a much wider geographical range than previously suspected, possibly extending from Siberia to Southeast Asia and even into Oceania. Some researchers propose that Denisovans might have been the first human population to develop sophisticated maritime technologies, enabling island-hopping expansions that brought human populations to Australia and New Guinea much earlier than previously thought possible. The genetic evidence for Denisovan ancestry in modern Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal populations supports this hypothesis. The tools and cultural materials associated with Denisovan sites show technological sophistication comparable to contemporary modern human and Neanderthal populations. Bone needles, decorative objects, and evidence for advanced toolmaking suggest that Denisovans possessed the cognitive capabilities and cultural complexity that defined all human species during this period. As Jorik returns to his own camp, he carries with him observations of competitors who are also relatives, strangers who share fundamental aspects of human nature despite their physical and cultural differences. The interactions between his people and the Neanderthals will help shape the genetic and cultural legacy that both groups leave to future generations. The modern human expansion that Jorik represents wasn't a simple replacement of primitive populations by advanced ones, but a complex process of interaction, competition, cooperation, and genetic exchange that created the hybrid ancestry that defines modern human populations. We are not the pure descendants of a single African lineage, but the products of ancient meetings between different branches of the human family tree. Tonight, as both modern human and Neanderthal families gather around their respective fires, they share more than they realize. Similar cognitive capabilities, comparable technological achievements, and genetic legacies that will intertwine their descendants' fates across thousands of generations. The shadows between their camps hide not just competitors, but the complex relationships that make every modern human a living testament to the interconnected story of multiple human species. Part 9. The world turns to ice. Vera pulls her fur-lined cloak tighter against the biting wind that carries the promise of the longest winter her people have ever known. Around her, The landscape has transformed from the familiar green valleys of her childhood into something alien and hostile. Endless expanses of snow broken only by patches of stunted vegetation clinging to life in the brief summer thaws. This is marine isotope stage 4, roughly 70,000 years ago, and Earth has slipped into one of its periodic deep freezes that reshape continents, drain oceans, and force every living thing to adapt. Migrate, or D. For Vera's small band of modern humans, survival means mastering challenges that will test every innovation their species has developed over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. The ice sheets that dominate northern Europe and North America represent more than just frozen water. They're massive geological forces that have lowered sea levels by over 100 meters, exposing land bridges between continents and islands that won't exist during warmer periods. The world map that Vera navigates bears no resemblance to modern geography, with coastlines hundreds of kilometers from their present positions. But the physical changes pale beside the biological disruptions that glacial periods create. Forest ecosystems that sustain both humans and their prey have contracted into small refugia scattered across southern latitudes. The great herds of mammoth, bison, and reindeer that provided protein for Ice Age hunters have been compressed into narrow corridors where competition for resources intensifies among all predators, human and non-human alike. Vera's people have adapted their technology and social organization to meet challenges that would have been unimaginable to their African ancestors. Their clothing systems involve multiple layers of carefully prepared animal skins designed to trap insulating air while managing moisture that could freeze against the skin and cause deadly heat loss. Every garment represents specialized knowledge about hide preparation, cutting patterns, and sewing techniques that took generations to develop. The shelters they construct combine engineering principles with materials science in ways that maximize heat retention while minimizing construction effort. Semi-subterranean pit houses utilize Earth's insulating properties, while carefully designed ventilation systems prevent carbon monoxide poisoning from the fires that provide essential warmth. Mammoth bone frameworks support hide coverings that create living spaces capable of maintaining survivable temperatures, even when external conditions drop far below freezing. Food procurement during glacial periods requires strategies unknown to populations in more temperate environments. Vera's group has learned to cache meat in permafrost, creating natural refrigeration systems that preserve protein through seasons when hunting opportunities become scarce. They've developed techniques for extracting every possible calorie from scarce resources: bone marrow, organ meat, even the fat stores that allow animals to survive harsh conditions. The social adaptations required for glacial survival are as complex as the technological ones. Groups must be large enough to handle the workload of manufacturing cold weather gear, constructing insulated shelters, and procuring sufficient calories to fuel metabolisms running at maximum capacity. But they can't be so large that they exhaust local resources or become unable to move quickly when environmental conditions change. Archaeological evidence from glacial period sites shows remarkable innovations in tool technology that reflect adaptation to specific environmental challenges. Composite tools that combine multiple materials, stone, bone, antler, wood, create implements that remain functional in extreme cold where single material tools might break or become unusable. Sewing needles carved from bone enable the precise stitch work required for effective cold weather clothing. The psychological challenges of surviving glacial periods extend beyond simple physical hardship. Extended periods of darkness, confined living conditions, and constant stress from resource scarcity create mental health challenges that require social solutions. Archaeological sites show evidence for artistic expression, musical instruments, and decorative objects that suggest Ice Age populations developed cultural mechanisms for maintaining morale and social cohesion during the most difficult periods. Vera's band follows migration patterns that synchronize human movements with animal populations and seasonal resource availability. These journeys aren't random wandering, but carefully planned expeditions based on accumulated knowledge of territorial conditions, weather patterns, and the timing of biological cycles that determine when and where food sources will be available. Climate proxy data from ice cores and marine sediments reveals that glacial periods weren't simply long, stable cold phases, but dynamic systems characterized by rapid climate fluctuations that could transform local conditions within decades or even years. Groups that survived these periods had to maintain flexibility and decision-making capabilities that allowed rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. The genetic bottlenecks that occurred during severe glacial periods left lasting marks on human DNA that are still visible today. Population contractions during the coldest phases reduced human diversity and created founder effects that influenced the genetic characteristics of post-glacial populations. Some researchers argue that major technological and cultural innovations were driven by the selection pressures created during these demographic crises. Yet glacial periods also created opportunities unavailable during warmer phases. Lowered sea levels exposed continental shelves that provided new territorial ranges for expanding populations. Land bridges enabled migrations to previously unreachable continents and islands. The compressed geographical ranges of both humans and their prey facilitated cultural exchange and technological diffusion between groups that might never have encountered each other under different conditions. As Vera's people navigate across the frozen landscape, they carry with them cultural innovations that will persist long after the ice retreats. The clothing technologies they've developed will influence textile traditions for thousands of years. The food preservation techniques they've mastered will enable future populations to survive in marginal environments and support larger, more complex societies. The artistic traditions that emerge from Ice Age populations represent some of humanity's earliest experiments with symbolic expression and aesthetic creation. Cave paintings, carved figurines, and decorated tools from glacial period sites show sophisticated artistic capabilities that suggest symbolic thinking and cultural transmission systems comparable to those of modern populations. Fire technology becomes even more crucial during glacial periods, not just for warmth, but for the social and psychological functions that flame provides during long, dark winters. Hearths become focal points for group activities, storytelling, tool maintenance, and the social interactions that maintain group cohesion when external conditions make dispersed activities impossible. The hunting strategies that Vera's people employ during the Ice Age require unprecedented levels of cooperation and planning. Taking down mammoth or other megafauna demands coordinated group action, specialized roles, and risk-sharing mechanisms that distribute both the dangers and benefits of large game hunting across the entire band. As the brief summer approaches and Vera's group prepares for another season of intensive resource gathering before the next winter, they participate in cycles that have shaped human evolution for millions of years. The Ice Age isn't just a period they're surviving, it's a selective environment that's forging the genetic, technological, and cultural characteristics that will define their descendants for thousands of generations. The world will eventually warm again, the ice sheets will retreat, and sea levels will rise to flood the coastal plains where Vera's people now hunt. But the adaptations they've developed during this period of maximum challenge, physical, technological, social, and cultural, will persist as part of the human toolkit that enables survival in any environment Earth can create. Tonight, as Vera's band settles into their insulated shelter while Arctic winds howl across the frozen landscape outside, they represent the cutting edge of human adaptability. Tomorrow, they'll wake to continue their endless negotiation with a planet that tests every species' capacity for survival, armed with innovations that transform environmental challenge into evolutionary opportunity. Part 10. The Human Blueprint, Scars, Tools, and Genes We Still Carry. David sits in a modern coffee shop, scrolling through his smartphone while unconsciously sharing a laugh with strangers at the next table. He has no idea that his ability to digest milk as an adult, his instinctive urge to help others even at personal cost, and the way his immune system fights off infections all carry the fingerprints of ancestors who lived 300,000 years ago in a world that was actively trying to kill them every single day. The DNA flowing through David's veins tells a story written in harsh environments, shaped by predators, and refined through hundreds of thousands of years of survival against impossible odds. Every cell in his body carries genetic variants that were tested in the crucible of Ice Age Europe, the grasslands of Pleistocene Africa, and the challenging landscapes where early humans learned to turn environmental pressure into evolutionary advantage. His Neanderthal ancestry, comprising roughly 2% of his genome, influences more aspects of his daily life than he'll ever realize. The immune system genes he inherited from archaic human populations help his body recognize and fight pathogens that his purely African ancestors never encountered. TLR variants that originated in Neanderthal populations provide enhanced detection of bacterial infections, while OAS genes improve his antiviral responses in ways that reflect hundreds of thousands of years of pathogen exposure in Eurasian environments. The morning coffee David enjoys represents a relationship with psychoactive substances that traces back to the earliest human populations who learned to identify, process, and utilize plant compounds for their physiological effects. His brain's dopamine reward systems, which make the caffeine hit pleasurable, evolved in environments where the ability to identify beneficial plant chemicals could mean the difference between survival and death. When David automatically offers to help a colleague move apartments this weekend, he's expressing behavioral patterns that were literally life and death necessities for his ancestors. The reciprocal altruism that makes him willing to invest time and energy helping others operates according to neural algorithms refined over hundreds of thousands of years of small group living, where individual survival depended absolutely on maintaining cooperative relationships within the band. The tools surrounding David's modern life, his smartphone, laptop, car keys, represent the latest iteration of human technological evolution that began with the first stone tools crafted by his ancient ancestors. The same cognitive processes that allowed early humans to envision how striking one rock against another could create a sharp edge now enable engineers to design microprocessors and software developers to write complex code. His hand anatomy still shows modifications that evolve specifically for tool use. The precision grip that allows him to manipulate small objects, the thumb mobility that enables power and delicate manipulation, the wrist articulation that provides the range of motion needed for complex manual tasks. These physical features were shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of ancestors whose survival depended on their ability to manufacture and use increasingly sophisticated implements. The social psychology that governs David's workplace interactions operates according to principles that were established when human groups numbered fewer than 50 individuals and everyone's contribution to collective survival was immediately visible. His sensitivity to reputation and social status, his ability to form coalitions and negotiate conflicts, his emotional responses to fairness and reciprocity, all of these reflect neural systems calibrated for the small-scale societies where humans evolved. Even his sleep patterns carry traces of ancestral adaptations to dangerous environments. The light sleep phases that allow him to wake easily to unusual sounds, the tendency toward biphasic sleep with natural awakening during the night, the circadian rhythms that synchronize with day-night cycles. These patterns reflect hundreds of thousands of years of ancestors who had to remain vigilant against predators and other threats during vulnerable sleeping periods. The foods David craves and finds satisfying reflect nutritional priorities established when calories were scarce and survival depended on efficiently extracting energy from whatever resources could be obtained. His preference for sweet, salty, and fatty foods mirrors the foraging priorities of ancestors who needed to identify and prioritize the most calorie-dense options available in unpredictable environments. His ability to learn languages, recognize faces, navigate complex social hierarchies, and maintain emotional bonds with large networks of individuals represents cognitive capabilities that were forged in the pressures of group living where communication, cooperation, and social intelligence determined who survived to reproduce and who didn't. The stress response systems that flood David's body with adrenaline during challenging situations operate according to programming established when physical threats were immediate and life-threatening. His fight-or-flight responses, while often maladaptive in modern environments, reflect neural and hormonal systems that kept his ancestors alive during encounters with predators, competitors, and environmental crises. Even David's capacity for symbolic thinking and abstract reasoning carries the legacy of ancestors who developed the cognitive flexibility to let one thing represent another, to understand that marks on cave walls could carry meaning, that sounds could represent objects and concepts, that social rituals could bind groups together through shared symbolic systems. The genetic variants that help David's body adapt to high altitudes derive from Denisovan ancestry that his Tibetan colleagues carry, while his friend Sarah's ability to digest dairy products as an adult reflects agricultural adaptations that emerged thousands of years after the period we've been exploring. Human evolution didn't stop 300,000 years ago. It accelerated and diversified as populations adapted to new environments and challenges. But perhaps most remarkably, David carries within his neural architecture the same fundamental capacity for cooperation, innovation, and collective problem-solving that allowed his ancestors to survive in a world where everything was trying to kill them. The same cognitive abilities that enabled early humans to share resources during famines, develop new technologies in response to environmental challenges, and maintain social bonds across generations of hardship, now allow modern humans to collaborate on global challenges like climate change, pandemic response, and space exploration. The evening when David calls his parents, checks on elderly neighbors, or volunteers at a local charity, he's expressing the same psychological mechanisms that made survival possible for small groups of humans facing impossible odds 300,000 years ago. The capacity for empathy, the willingness to invest in relationships that don't provide immediate benefits, the ability to coordinate collective action across large groups, these are the same mental tools that turned vulnerable primates into the dominant species on Earth. As David falls asleep in his climate-controlled apartment, protected by locks, alarms, and social institutions that provide security unimaginable to his ancestors, he carries within every cell of his body the genetic legacy of people who survived by learning to share, to cooperate, to innovate, and to never give up in the face of challenges that would defeat any individual acting alone. The blueprint for human survival was written in environments where being human was an act of daily courage, where every innovation was tested against immediate life and death consequences, where social bonds weren't lifestyle choices but survival necessities. That blueprint still runs in David's DNA, in his neural architecture, in his instinctive responses to challenge and opportunity. Everything we are, our bodies, our minds, our irrepressible tendency to cooperate with strangers and build societies that transcend individual self-interest, was field-tested against predators, starvation, climate catastrophes, and the endless creative challenges of a planet that forced our species to become ingenious or extinct. The human story that began 300,000 years ago in Africa continues today in every act of creativity, cooperation, and courage that defines our species. We are the descendants of people who refused to surrender to impossible odds, who turned environmental pressures into opportunities for innovation, who discovered that survival was possible only through shared effort and collective intelligence. That legacy lives on in every human heart that chooses cooperation over competition, innovation over resignation, hope over despair. The same blueprint that carried our ancestors through the hardest challenges our planet could devise now guides us toward futures we can barely imagine, armed with the same fundamental capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and mutual support that made the human story possible in the first place. As you drift towards sleep tonight, wherever you are in the world, remember that you carry within yourself the DNA of survivors, the neural architecture of innovators, and the psychological inheritance of people who looked at impossible odds and refused to quit. Every breath you take is a victory lap for ancestors who earned their right to the future through courage, creativity, and above all, the recognition that survival is a team sport. Sweet dreams from all of us who share this ancient human journey. May you rest well knowing that you are the living proof that no challenge is too great when faced together.